Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookish Babbles, the podcast where we reread our favorite books and chat about them. I'm your host, Alyson, and without further ado, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of Bookish Babbles. Today we are talking about the first 3 chapters of Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. Woo! We're officially halfway through the series, and I can't believe it. Fun fact, Catching Fire, the book, was first released on September 1st, 2009. It is over 10 years old. And it's also the same day that, the kiddos start Hogwarts, so fun thing. And this is, of course, the sequel to The Hunger Games. And, by the way, it's such a simple title, but I really love it because we're keeping up, the fire theme, of course, because Katniss is the girl on fire, duh. But it also reflects, the fire of the rebellion catching in Panem, because, spoiler alert, we learn in this book that more and more districts are starting to fight back against the capital, so there's that. And to start us out, I thought it'd be a good idea to just read the summary of the book that's on Goodreads. Sparks are igniting, flames are spreading, and the capital wants revenge. Against all odds, Katniss Everdeen has won the Hunger Games. She and fellow District 12 tribute Peeta Mellark are miraculously still alive. Katniss should be relieved, even happy. After all, she has returned to her family and her longtime friend Gale, yet nothing is the way Katniss wishes it to be. Gale holds her at an icy distance. Peeta has turned his back on her completely, and there are whispers of a rebellion against the capital, a rebellion that Katniss and Peeta may have helped create. Much to her shock, Katniss has fueled an unrest that she is afraid she cannot stop, and what scares her even more is that she's not entirely convinced she should try. As time draws near for Katniss and Peeta to visit the districts on the capital's cruel victory tour, the stakes are higher than ever. If they can't prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that they are lost in their love for each other, the consequences will be horrifying. In Catching Fire, the second novel of the Hunger Games trilogy, Suzanne Collins continues the story of Katniss Everdeen, testing her more even than before, and surprising readers at every turn. I mean, yes, I remember the first time I read this book, just like with the Hunger Games, there were parts where I was gasping out loud because I couldn't believe where the story was going. So, with all that being said, let's dive into the first chapter. Okay, so we are on part 1 of the book, which is called The Spark, and how else can I start but with a reading, of course, because Suzanne has the audacity to be a phenomenal writer and knows exactly how to open a book. Gosh darn it, how dare she? Anyway, I clasp the flask between my hands, even though the warmth from the tea has long since leached into the frozen air. My muscles are clenched tight against the cold. If a pack of wild dogs were to appear at this moment, the odds of scaling a tree before they attacked are not in my favor. I should get up, move around, and work the stiffness from my limbs, but instead I sit as motionless as the rock beneath me while the dawn begins to lighten the woods. I can't fight the sun. I can only watch helplessly as it drags me into a day that I've been dreading for months. So right away we learn that Katniss is not in a good place right now and is very different from the Katniss that we meet at the beginning of book 1. In the first paragraph of The Hunger Games, Katniss wakes up and is almost immediately in motion. She gets dressed and heads out to the woods to go hunting, and she spends almost that entire first chapter just moving and doing things. That chapter also ended with Katniss volunteering for Prim at the Reaping, so the whole first chapter of book 1 is basically spent telling us that Katniss is an active protagonist even within this very oppressive and controlling society. But here in the opening of book 2, the image we get of her is in stark contrast to that. She knows that she needs to move, that she needs to get on with the day, but she can barely fathom the idea of even standing up. And I'm not an expert, obviously. I don't have a degree, but From my understanding, a moment like this is really common among those with depression and PTSD. So, right away, we're hit with the reality of what kind of effect the games had on Katniss. She's not the same as she was at the beginning of book one, because unless you're not human, I don't think anyone can go through an experience like that and not come out messed up on some level. Anyway, moving on from this paragraph, we learn that it's been about 6 months since the end of the last book, and today is the day she starts the victory tour. Because it's not enough to do the Hunger Games once a year. Nope, gotta force the districts to celebrate again by parading the victors around and pretend to love them and all that good stuff and throw parties. Not to mention horrifying for the victors because they'll have to face the families of uh, of the kids whose the deaths they were probably responsible for. Um, but I do love that the victory tour was included in the book because it's such a simple but brilliant idea. Because on the one hand, it obviously just continues to show the cruelty of the Capitol, and it's a great way to expand on the world building. We get to see some of the other districts and their reaction to everything that's going on. Plus, this is a world where most of its citizens are never allowed to travel, especially district citizens. Unless they get reaped for the Hunger Games or become a peacekeeper, they aren't allowed to leave the district they're born into. So this gives Katniss reason to leave 12 at the beginning of the book. Anyway, back to the present. So the sun is rising and Katniss finally forces herself to stand up and check the snare line so she can bring meat back for Gale's family. She no longer has to worry about feeding her own family since she now has more money than she can ever spend as a victor. And actually, Katniss has enough to feed Gale's family as well, but Gale is so stubborn and prideful that he won't take any of it. I considered making a tally every time Gale acts like a dumb, prideful teenage boy and or just gets on my nerves in general, but that would be too hard to keep track of. Instead, he'd just rather work in the mines for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He could, not risk his life in the mines every day and potentially die like his father did, and, just be with his family more and get to hang out in the woods more with Katniss, his supposed best friend. Side note, it's also kind of interesting that Katniss and Gale have different reactions to the trauma of losing their fathers in the same mining accident, because Gale's able to push through and work in the mines, and I'm sure he hates it, but he only does it so he could feed his family. Meanwhile, I don't think Katniss could have ever worked in the mines. On page 5, she tells us that every year her class takes a field trip down into the mines, and she hated it even before her father died. Then after he died, the anxiety that the trip gave her was so bad that twice she was so sick with anticipation that her mother kept her home because she thought Katniss had the flu. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Katniss would have tried it at some point, but I don't think it would have lasted very long. She probably would have been okay because she could just go hunting full time. And it's what she's doing anyway right now for Gale's family since she needs something to do instead of just sitting around all day. And I think Gale only tolerates it because he realizes that he has some limits and can't be everywhere at once. Also, the only time Katniss sees him now is on Sundays, his one day off, but things aren't the same between them. So the games are just, really screwing with Katniss's life. Anyway, she gets a decent haul of 8 rabbits, 2 squirrels, and a beaver. Also, there's an interesting line near the top of page 6 that I think says a lot about Gale's character and even foreshadows some of the darker aspects of Gale's character that we'll see much more clearly in the next book. He's, as in Gale, something of a whiz with snares, rigging them to bend saplings so they pull the kill out of reach of predators, balancing logs on delicate stick triggers, weaving inescapable baskets to capture fish. As I go along, carefully resetting each snare, I know I can never quite replicate his eye for balance, his instinct for where the prey will cross the path. It's more than experience, it's a natural gift, like the way I can shoot at an animal in almost complete darkness and still take it down with one arrow. So, kind of right from the beginning, Suzanne is telling us about Gale's dark nature, but, some of us didn't listen. Anyway, Katniss heads home, checks to make sure that the electric fence isn't on. Important to remember for later. Katniss walks through the meadow and goes to her own home to change out of her hunting gear. The house still technically belongs to her mother, but Katniss is the only one who uses it now since they've all moved into the Victor's village. Katniss gives herself a moment to sit in the kitchen and reflects on the fact that, in retrospect, they were more secure living there, barely scraping by, versus now being rich but in more danger since most of the capital higher ups hate her. Oh, I lied earlier. My bad, guys. Katniss isn't the only one who visits the old home. Buttercup, the cat, also shows up, and the two of them somewhat bond over the fact that they don't particularly like it in the new home. Then Katniss goes to the Hawthorne home to drop the game off, though Gale isn't home since he's out working in the mines. By the way, quick side note: I almost always forget that in the book, Gale isn't in the woods with Katniss for that first scene, since I've seen the movie so many times. Though that made sense for the movie since they had to reintroduce characters and had less time than the book does, obviously. Anyway, speaking of things that are changed from book to movie, you know who's left out of the movie besides Madge? Hazel, Gale's mother. Also the rest of his family. I think it's a shame that Gale's family never even made an appearance in the movies because it's a good reminder that Gale has his own family and a life outside of Katniss. I mean, they're mentioned like one or two times, but if you've only seen the movies, I think it's easy to forget that Katniss isn't the only person in his life that Gale cares about. Anyway, Katniss drops off the meat and even offers to teach Gale's 12-year-old brother Rory to shoot after she gets back from the tour. Then she goes to the Hob, and here we learn that Katniss feels like she really owes the people of the Hob because during the games, Greasy Say, Lucy Gray, what? Who said that? Anyway, Greasy Say started a collection in order to sponsor her and Peeta in the arena, and started out as a Hob thing, but more people heard about it and wanted to chip in. Katniss has no idea how much money was raised, but for all she knows, it was a difference between life and death. So now Katniss regularly buys things from the Hob as a way to pay them back. And reminder, guys, support your local businesses whenever you can. Anyway, I love this for so many reasons. Not only because it's just so sweet that so many people came together for her, but it's a really small scale example of the impact Katniss has on people, that they're willing to rally behind her, and Katniss is almost completely unaware of this. Also, for those of you who don't know, I subscribe to the theory that Greasy Say is Lucy Gray, and if that's true, then I love the fact that Greasy Say started the collection to sponsor Katniss even more, because Lucy would know Katniss's success would drive Snow crazy, the man who ruined her life and tried to kill her, so naturally she would want to do something in order to help Katniss. Plus, I think she's just fond of Katniss in general, having known her for years, and if Katniss is a descendant of Maud Ivory, like a lot of us in the fandom seem to believe, then Katniss would also be family to Greasy Say. By the way, I keep forgetting to talk about this, but does anyone else think that the little girl they cast to play Maud Ivory in the Ballad movie looks pretty similar to Willow Shields, aka the actress who played Prim? So, is the movie gonna lean into this theory? Maybe? I don't know. Guess we'll have to find out. Anyway, Katniss buys stuff from the various stalls, even white liquor for Haymitch, since she likes to make sure he's always stocked up so he doesn't suffer from any withdrawal symptoms, since they witnessed it once and it wasn't pretty. She also gets a bowl of soup from Greasy Say, and we're introduced to another character who isn't in the movie, Darius, the young 20-something peacekeeper that most people like. They have this wonderful exchange on page 11. So it starts with Darius saying, "Aren't you supposed to be on the train?" he asks me. "They're collecting me at noon," I answer. "Shouldn't you look better?" he asks in a loud whisper. I can't help smiling at his teasing, in spite of my mood. "Maybe a ribbon in your hair or something?" He flicks my braid with his hand, and I brush him away. "Don't worry, by the time they get through with me, I'll be unrecognizable," I say. Good, he said. Let's show him a little district pride for a change, Miss Everdeen. He shakes his head at Greasy Say in mock disapproval and walks off to join his friends. I'll want that bowl back, Greasy Say calls after him, but since she's laughing, she doesn't sound particularly stern. I love Darius. It's a shame he wasn't in the movie. Anyway, then Greasy Say asks if Gale is going to see Katniss off at the train, but she says no since he didn't make the list. Then Greasy Say makes the comment that she would have thought he would be since he's her cousin. And we learned that during the games when she and Peeta made it to the top 8 and reporters visited their families in order to get to know the tributes better, everyone naturally pointed to Gale since they were known to be close. And because of, dumb heteronormative standards, Katniss having a handsome male friend she's not related to back home wouldn't serve the star-crossed lover storyline with Peeta very well, so Gale gets presented to the nation as Katniss's cousin. Greasy Say knows they're not related, but most others seem to have forgotten. And also, I promise I won't linger on the Lucy Gray Greasy Say theory so much, though it's hard since Lucy Gray is my favorite character. But I will bring it up one more time because it makes this exchange between her and Katniss at the bottom of page 12 mean so much more. So it starts with Katniss saying, I just can't wait for the whole thing to be over, I whisper. I know, says Greasy Say, but you've got to go through it to get to the end of it. Better not be late. I love this so much. Just the I know has so much more weight to it if it is Lucy Gray, because she does know. She knows what it's like to be a victor, to go through the games. Anyway, Katniss heads back to the victor's village and heads to Haymitch's house first to, make sure he's awake. And his house also smells because he does a poor job of cleaning and won't let anyone else do it. And meanwhile, Haymitch is currently passed out on the kitchen table because, of course, he is. She can't shake him awake, so she pours cold water on him. Haymitch jumps up, screaming and wielding a knife, and Katniss mentally scolds herself for forgetting that he always sleeps with one in his hand, which is so sad and hints at how brutal it is to go through the games and how much of an effect it has on the victors, because Haymitch's games was over 20 years ago, but the fact that he still sleeps with a knife tells us that the arena is still with him. And their conversation on page 14 just continues to be A+, as usual. So it starts with Haymitch saying, What are you doing? He sputters. You told me to wake you an hour before the cameras come, I say. What? He said. Your idea, I insist. He seems to remember. Why am I all wet? I couldn't shake you awake, I say. Look, if you wanted to be babied, you should have asked Peeta. Ask me what? Awkward. Haymitch wonderfully replies, asked you to wake me without giving me pneumonia. Katniss and Peeta continue to be awkward by speaking very stiffly and formally to each other, since Katniss still feels bad about the whole, having to mislead Peeta in the arena. And this is a problem since, as Haymitch said, they have a lot of warming up to do before showtime, since the audience is expecting to see two people desperately in love with each other. But Katniss responds by saying, Take a bath, Haymitch, and just hops out the window. Good times. My dog's currently going crazy upstairs. Then she goes home and senses something wrong when her mother asks her if she had a nice walk. And what else can I do except read the end of the chapter now? So it starts on page 16 when Katniss's mother says, Someone's here to see you, says my mother. Her face is too pale, and I can hear the anxiety she's trying to hide. I thought they weren't due until noon. I pretended not to notice her state. Did Cinna come early to help me get ready? No, Katniss, my mother begins. This way, please, Miss Everdeen, says the man. He gestures down the hallway. It's weird to be ushered around in your own home, but I know better than to comment on it. As I go, I give my mother a reassuring smile over my shoulder. Probably more instructions for the tour. They've been sending me all kinds of stuff about my itinerary and what protocol will be observed in each district. But as I walk toward the door of the study, a door I have never seen closed until this moment, I can feel my mind begin to race. Who is here? What do they want? Why is my mother so pale? Go right in, says the capital man, who has followed me down the hallway. I twist the polished brass knob and step inside. My nose registers the conflicting scents of roses and blood. A small white-haired man who appears vaguely familiar is reading a book. He holds up a finger as if to say, "Give me a moment." Then he turns and my heart skips a beat. I'm staring into the snake-like eyes of President Snow. And with that said, it is time for a break. When we get back, we'll talk about Chapter 2 and cover the whole conversation that's about to happen. Hey guys, it's Alyson from A Different Point in Time, and I'm here to bring you another random recommendation. So, for my first recommendation this week, I'm recommending a book by an author who's pretty popular, Emily St. John Mandel. If the name sounds familiar, she wrote The Glass Hotel and Station 11. I haven't read The Glass Hotel yet, but Station 11's really good. But earlier this year, she released a new book called Sea of Tranquility, and I really liked it, so I'll read you guys the summary. Edwin St. Andrew is 18 years old when he crosses the Atlantic by steamship, exiled from polite English society following an ill-conceived diatribe at a dinner party. He enters the forest spellbound by the beauty of the Canadian wilderness and suddenly hears the notes of a violin echoing in an airship terminal. An experience that shocks him to his core. 2 centuries later, a famous writer named Olivia Llewellyn, I didn't pronounce that rightly, is on a book tour. She's traveling all over Earth, but her home is the second moon colony, a place of white stone and spire towers in artificial beauty. Within the text of Olive's best-selling pandemic novel lies a strange passage. A man plays his violin for spare change in the echoing corridor of an airship terminal as the trees of a forest rise around him. When Gaspery Roberts, a hotel detective in the black-skied night city, is hired to investigate an anomaly in the North American wilderness, he uncovers a series of lives upended. The exiled son of an earl driven to madness, a writer trapped far from home as a pandemic ravages Earth, and a childhood friend from the night city who, like Gaspery himself, has glimpsed the chance to do something extraordinary that will disrupt the timeline of the universe. So yeah, this book it can be pretty sci-fi and deals with time in an interesting way. Basically, I think if you like just time travel things in general, this is a really interesting book, and it's also really pretty to look at. So yeah, highly recommend Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. With that being said, let's get back to the episode. And we're back. So, fair warning, I'm very liable to read multiple passages from this chapter because this scene between Snow and Katniss is just so good. Probably one of the best scenes in the whole series, and definitely one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Jennifer Lawrence, just on her own, is already fantastic in every scene she's in. But Donald Sutherland, oh my god, he just kills it every time he's on screen. And, like talk about a villain who steals the show. Anyway, I'll never shut up about that. But anyway, let's get into the scene in the book. So Katniss is understandably stunned. I think the way any of us would be if the president or leader of whatever nation we live in just, randomly showed up in our home. Because most of us are used to seeing world leaders just from a distance, usually with some kind of ceremony or fanfare surrounding them. So it would be jarring to suddenly see them in a more ordinary setting. Specifically for Snow, Katniss describes it as, quote unquote, like taking the lid off a pot and finding a fanged viper instead of stew, end quote. Just keeping up the snake imagery. And almost immediately, Katniss recognizes that this is a very big deal, obviously. In her memory, the president never makes an appearance in the Victory Tour except in the capital, so the only reason he'd be here now in District 12 is because she's in serious trouble. And side note, I wonder if Snow visited any of the spots he used to hang out in, like the Meadow or the Hob, but Probably not, but it's still funny to think about for some reason. Anyway, Katniss standing there, shocked and terrified because she knows that she's in serious trouble because, this man hates her so much, is so close to her family, and could just very easily be like, yeah, you're dead now, bye. And Snow ends up being the first one to speak and says, I think one of his most famous lines, I think we'll make this whole situation a lot simpler by agreeing not to lie to each other. Such an amazing line. And I believe this is the first line that we see Snow speak directly to Katniss, and the first line he speaks in the book, period, because in the last book he made 2 appearances and we don't get a direct line from him. We're just told through narration that, he gives a speech or whatever. And the most meaningful interaction we have with him is during the victory crowning ceremony when he gives Katniss that dirty look. So this is the first really real interaction we've had with good old Coriolanus since Ballad, and I don't know how to explain it, but after reading Ballad, it's like I almost picture him differently now. Like, I have no idea how I pictured Snow pre-seeing the movies, but now I just picture like an old man version of the Corio that I picture in Ballad. But anyway, it's such a good line from a villain to the protagonist. It's almost like Snow is addressing an equal, but he's not talking down to her because she's a teenage girl like most people in power would, I think. Instead, it's almost like this weird respect he's extending to her, and he sees the threat that she is because, thanks to his experience with Lucy Gray, he knows not to underestimate a girl from District 12. And Katniss manages to speak and responds with the line, yes, I think it would save time. And then their conversation continues on page 19 with Snow saying, my advisors were concerned you would be difficult, but you're not planning on being difficult, are you? He asks. No, I answer. That's what I told them. I said any girl who goes to such lengths to preserve her life isn't going to be interested in throwing it away with both hands. And then there's her family to think of, her mother, her sister, and all those cousins. By the way he lingers on the word cousins, I can tell he knows that Gale and I don't share a family tree. Well, it's all on the table now. Maybe that's better. I don't do well with ambiguous threats. I'd much rather know the score. Let's sit. President Snow takes a seat at the large desk of polished wood where Prim does her homework and my mother does her budgets. Like our home, this is a place that he has no right, but ultimately every right to occupy. I sit in front of the desk on one of the carved straight-back chairs. It's made for someone taller than I am, so only my toes rest on the crown. I have a problem, Miss Everdeen, says President Snow. A problem that began the moment you pulled out those poisonous berries in the arena. That was the moment when I guessed that if the game makers had to choose between watching Peeta and me commit suicide, which would mean having no victor, and letting us both live, they would take the later. If the head game maker, Seneca Crane, had any brains, he'd have blown you to dust right then and there. But he had an unfortunate sentimental streak, so here you are. Can you guess where he is? He asks. I nod, because by the way he says it, it's clear that Seneca Crane has been executed. The smell of roses and blood has grown stronger now that only a desk separates us. There's a rose in President Snow's lapel, which at least suggests a source of the flower perfume, but it must be genetically enhanced because no real rose reeks like that. As for the blood, I don't know. After that, there was nothing to do but let you play out your little scenario, and you were pretty good, too. With the love-crazed schoolgirl bit, the people in the capital were quite convinced. Unfortunately, not everyone in the districts fell for your act, he said. My face must register at least a flicker of bewilderment because he addresses it. This, of course, you don't know. You have no access to information about the mood in the other districts. In several of them, however, people viewed your little trick with the berries as an act of defiance, not an act of love. And if a girl from District 12 of all places can defy the capital and walk away unharmed, what is to stop them from doing the same, he asked. What is to prevent, say, an uprising? It takes a moment for this last sentence to sink in, then the full weight of it hits me. There have been uprisings? I asked, both chilled and somewhat elated by the possibility. Not yet, but they'll follow if the course of things doesn't change. And uprisings have been known to lead to revolution. President Snow rubs a spot over his left eyebrow, the very spot where I myself get headaches. Do you have any idea what this would mean? How many people would die? What conditions those left would have to face? Whatever problems anyone may have with the capital, believe me when I say that if it released its grip on the districts for even a short time, the entire system would collapse. I'm taken aback by the directness and even sincerity of his speech, as if his primary concern is the welfare of the citizens of Panem, when nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know how I dare say the next words, but I do. It must be very fragile if a handful of berries can bring it down. There's a long pause while he examines me. Then he simply says, "It is fragile, but not in the way that you suppose." And again, I just love how honest Snow is here with Katniss. Also, kind of feels like a real twisted teaching moment. And I love how he paints such an honest picture of the realities of war and the destruction it will cause. And there's so much more meaning behind it because we know now that as a young child, Snow experienced firsthand what that's like. And it even kind of hints at the themes that we'll see in Mockingjay, because war and rebellion isn't this big, glorious thing. There are very real losses. And this scene is just so good because, one, we'll see that in a lot of ways Snow was right. And I'm almost on his side in a weird way, which just goes to show how good Snow is at influencing people. Because even at 18 years old, when he was out of money and about to lose his home, he still managed to be charming and appealing and could influence people. He's still a very evil man, but a very good politician because, how else could he stay in power for so long? And so to be clear, the capital should absolutely be overthrown. Snow sucks. But he gives a kind of interesting reality check in this moment. Anyway, their conversation is briefly interrupted when Mrs. Everdeen offers them tea. She brings them a tray of tea and cookies that Peeta had baked. Snow continues to be the charming politician by praising Mrs. Everdeen for her hospitality and seems to relax her a bit, and then she leaves. And then the two continue the conversation with Katniss saying, "I didn't mean to start any uprisings," I tell him. "I believe you. It doesn't matter. Your stylist turned out to be prophetic with his wardrobe choice. Katniss Everdeen, the girl who was on fire, you have provided a spark that, left unattended, may grow into an inferno that destroys Panem," he says. "Why don't you just kill me now?" I blurt out. "Publicly?" he asks. "That would only add fuel to the flames." "Arrange an accident, then," I say. "Who would buy it?" he asked. "Not you, if you were watching." "Then just tell me what you want me to do. I'll do it," I say. If only it were that simple. He picks up one of the floured cookies and examines it. "Lovely. Your mother made these?" "Peeta," and for the first time I find I can't hold his gaze. I reach for my tea, but set it back down when I hear the cup rattling against the saucer. To cover, I quickly take a cookie. "Peeta, how is the love of your life?" he asks. "Good," I say. "At what point did he realize the exact degree of your indifference?" he asks, dipping his cookie in his tea. "I'm not indifferent," I say. "But perhaps not as taken with the young man as you would have the country believe," he says. "Who says I'm not?" I say. "I do," says the president. "And I wouldn't be here if I were the only person who had doubts. How's that handsome cousin?" So yeah, Snow makes a direct threat to Gale's life, even says that Katniss isn't doing him any favors by going off into the woods with him every Sunday. Now Katniss is naturally paranoid in this moment, wondering how much Snow knows, wondering if it's possible that there were cameras in the woods, something she had never thought of before. But even if there were, then all they would see would be two people illegally hunting and, shit-talking the capital. Not good, but also not two people in love, which is what Snow's implying here. Then again, This is when we get a flashback to when Peeta and Katniss got home from the games. When they got off the train, there were of course mandatory celebrations, including a banquet that only the most high-ranking people were invited to, a holiday with food and entertainment brought in from the capital, and they also have the first of 12 parcel days, when food packages are given to each person in the districts. It's one of the few times Katniss feels good about winning the games because she gets to see all these kids who've never had enough to eat in their lives be given a bunch of food. Because of all this stuff, Katniss doesn't get to see Gale for about several weeks after getting home, so she doesn't have any privacy for a few weeks. After the cameras leave and Katniss is sure that the coast is clear, she gets up one Sunday morning and goes into the woods. She ends up waiting 2 hours before Gale shows up, and they fall back into their usual routine with hunting, though they do avoid talking about things like Gale's new life working in the mines and Katniss's time in the arena. And Katniss thinks that they can go back to the way things were and that their friendship will be able to go back to how it was pre-arena. They head back and enter at the hole of the fence nearest to the hob. Katniss gives Gale all the games since she has more than enough money now. Then, right as Katniss is suggesting that she take over the daily snare run, out of nowhere, Gale kisses her. Consent? Hello? What is going through your brain, Gale? What part of talking about snares equals, oh, she wants to kiss me right now? Like, how the hell did you make that connection? If you have to do that much mental gymnastics to make the connection between those two things, kissing her is probably the wrong idea. And it gets worse. After Gale's done assaulting, kissing Katniss, he says, I had to do that at least once. Did you now? Did you really, Gale? Then he just walks away. What the fuck? That is such a fuckboy asshole move right there. I can't believe I even pondered the idea of Team Gale at one point in my life. It was a very brief period and I was 14, so don't judge me too harshly for that one. Anyway, Katniss is naturally stunned and sits by the tree next to the fence, understandably, trying to process what the fuck just happened. And wonder if that's the hanging tree from the ballad. Maybe. Also, she sits there and can't figure out if she liked the kiss or not, and I don't have a ton of experience in the romance department, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if she doesn't know for sure if she liked the kiss or not, that's a bad sign. Okay, so, Katniss then goes about her week and mentally prepares a whole speech to tell Gale that she doesn't want a boyfriend, never plans to marry, yada yada yada, but turns out she doesn't need to use it. When they meet up in the woods again the following Sunday, Gale just acts like nothing happened between them the last time they saw each other. Low-key gaslights her in a way, I guess. So Katniss tries to do the same. But deep down she knows that because of what Gale did, they can never quite go back to the uncomplicated friendship that they had before. So, good job, Gale. Not only have you potentially ruined your relationship with your best friend, but you were also dumb enough to kiss her in a place where there were likely cameras watching you guys. Not a good idea when she's, in a very public relationship with someone else. I mean, relationship, quote unquote, but still. Because from Snow's point of view, it looks like Katniss is ignoring Peeta and openly showing preference for Gale and thus mocking the Capitol. And we know he can't have that. And we're close to the end of the chapter, so I'm just going to read it for you guys, starting on page 28. It starts with Katniss saying, "Please don't hurt Gale," I whisper. "He's just my friend. He's been my friend for years. That's all that's between us. Besides, everyone thinks we're cousins now." "I'm only interested in how it affects your dynamic with Peeta, thereby affecting the mood in the districts," he says. "It will be the same on the tour. I'll be in love with him just as I was, just as you are," corrects President Snow. "Just as I am," I confirm. "Only you'll have to do even better if the uprisings are to be averted," he says. "This tour will be your only chance to turn things around." "I know, I will. I'll convince everyone in the districts that I wasn't defying the Capitol, that I was crazy in love, I say." President Snow rises and dabs his puffy lips with a napkin. Aim higher in case you fall short. What do you mean? How can I aim higher? I ask. Convince me, he says. He drops the napkin and retrieves his book. I don't watch him as he heads for the door, so I flinch when he whispers in my ear, By the way, I know about the kiss. Then the door clicks shut behind him. Yeah, I definitely gasped out loud the first time I read this part, and, that just makes Snow, it cements Snow as one of the most terrifying villains I've ever read. So, with that being said, time for a break. When we come back, we'll talk about Chapter 3. Hello again, me with another random recommendation. So, this book is by one of my favorite authors who I rarely talk about, and this is probably one of the coolest books I've ever read. It's called 21 Truths About Love by Matthew Dix, and it has a really interesting format because the entire story is told in lists, like a series of lists that somehow all come together perfectly to tell a story. You guys just have to read it. It's so good. But I will read you the summary. Daniel's life is at a crossroad. He knows the following things to be true. 1. He loves his wife Jill more than anything. 2. He only regrets quitting his job and maybe opening a bookshop a little, maybe more than a little. 3. Jill wants to start a family. 4. The bookshop isn't doing well. Financial crisis is imminent. Dan doesn't know how to fix it. 5. Dan hasn't told Jill about their financial trouble. 6. Then Jill gets pregnant. This is a story about the lengths one man will go to and the risks he will take to save his family. But Dan doesn't just want to save his failing bookstore and his family's finances. He's tired of feeling ordinary. He's sick of feeling like a failure, and he doesn't want to live in the shadow of his wife's deceased first husband. Dan wants to do something special and maybe even dangerous. Dan begins to puzzle through a plan. It helps that he's an obsessive list maker, but options are limited and his fears for the future keep growing. His story, told in Dan's unique, hilarious, and heartfelt voice, reveals a man struggling to be a man who has reached a point where he's willing to do anything for the love and soon-to-be new love of his life. So yeah, it's a really good book and probably one of my favorites that Matthew Dix has written. My favorite by him so far still being Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend. But yes, I recommend this one. 21 Truths about Love. Everyone go buy a copy right now. Anyway, back to the episode. And we're back. So once again, a chapter opens with Katniss stunned and shocked. And she can also smell blood and says it was on Snow's breath. So even more creepy. So naturally, Katniss starts spiraling and thinking about everything Snow just said, uprising in the districts, everyone she loves being threatened, all that good stuff. Her only hope of turning things around is on the tour, but she doesn't believe that she's good enough to do that, which she kind of has a point, because Katniss has many talents, but acting is not one of them. Just then, she hears her mother's footsteps coming and immediately decides that her mother can't know about any of it, so she lies through her teeth and tells her mother that everything is fine and that it's normal for the president to congratulate the victor and wish them luck right before the tour. They just never see it on TV. And once again, this whole interaction just shows how sad the whole dynamic is, because in a perfect world, Katniss would be able to confide in her mother and not shoulder so much responsibility at 16 years old. And yeah, she's still 16 right now because it's the middle of winter and her birthday isn't until May. But this line on page 31 sums it up perfectly. I think about how there was no going back after I took over caring for the family when I was 11. How I will always have to protect her. Yeah, though the relationship is at least starting to improve between them. Katniss no longer automatically brushes aside offers for help, even asks her mother to do things for her occasionally. And she returns hugs, so that's progress, and even lets Mrs. Everdeen handle the money. One of the very few things that the game did for Katniss, and I mean very, very few things, was it gave her some perspective and it started to help her mend her relationship with her mother and that she couldn't help the depression. I mean, she's right, but Katniss, I think, also has a right to be a bit angry since she was still just a child when all that shit happened. I mean, hell, she still is a child. And Mrs. Everdeen did do one really cool thing when Katniss and Peeta got back from the Capitol. There was, of course, a brief press conference with the reporters. Someone asked Mrs. Everdeen how she feels about Katniss's new relationship with Peeta, and Mrs. Everdeen says that Peeta is, of course, a model boyfriend, but Katniss is still too young for a relationship. And the cameras get a kick out of it, and it gives Katniss an excuse not to immediately move in with Peeta, since there's this impression of, oh, Mrs. Everdeen's a strict but loving mother, that type of thing. Anyway, so Mrs. Everdeen draws up a bath for Katniss, and she sits in the tub and ponders over who to tell about her problem. And in the end, Katniss comes to the conclusion that the best person to tell is Haymitch. He kept her alive in the game, so maybe he can help her stay alive now. And she also mentions wishing the tub was bigger so she could go swimming like she used to in the summers with her father. And this is when we get the first mention of the lake, which, significant location. Interestingly enough, though, she's never taken Gale there. And then her prep team burst in. And they're probably the only group of people who can burst into the bathroom while Katniss is in the tub. Then again, as she said, there are no secrets between them when it comes to her body. Vania immediately shrieks when she sees the state of Katniss's eyebrows. Glad she has her priorities in order. And Katniss's nails are a mess since she keeps biting them, but at least she left her hair alone, so Katniss managed to partially do the assignment. Congratulations. Anyway, then the prep team starts chatting away, meaning Katniss only has to occasionally nod in agreement and won't have to speak much. They prattle about how boring things have been since the games ended, but they're so excited because, the quarter quell is coming up. Spoiler alert, they won't be excited for it in a couple months. We also learned that for the last quarter quell, which was the 50th games, each district had to provide double the amount of tributes, because every 25 years they like to do a special twist on the games. But that year, the second quarter quell also happened to be the year that Haymitch won. And Katniss doesn't know the exact details of Haymitch's games, doesn't even remember seeing any reruns on TV, but more on that later. Then Mrs. Everdeen comes in and shows the team how to do Katniss's signature braid from the day of the reaping. The prep team earnestly and excitedly watches and learns, and Katniss realizes that she should be nicer to her prep team and try to feel less superior to them. After all, who knows how she would have turned out had she been born in the capital. By the way, I don't think Gale would have ever come to a conclusion like that, so more proof that Katniss is a better person than Gale. Anyway, when her hair is done, Katniss goes downstairs and Cinna is waiting for her, and we learn that Katniss and Cinna regularly talk on the phone because Cinna helps Katniss with her talent, something each Victor is supposed to have since they no longer have to work for a living. So Cinna helps her with fashion designing. Peeta already has an acceptable talent. He's a painter. They then film a video of Katniss presenting clothes like a YouTuber. And then Prim comes home early from school. She's now in the kitchen being interviewed and wearing a pretty blue dress. And then the PTSD kicks in real hard because for a moment Katniss sees Rue instead of Prim standing there. Anyway, no time to dwell on that, though. Mrs. Everdeen gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin for good luck. Then Katniss heads outside so they can film her and Peeta greeting each other, being all cutesy. They have a moment when Peeta picks her up and spins her around, slips, they fall back into the snow, and they kiss. And even though the two are barely speaking, they still got each other's back, like real friends. And the rest of the day passes in a blur, and before you know it, they're on the train, just like old times. Effie going on about the schedule, and Haymitch getting drunk. What else is new? And in the middle of the night, Katniss goes to Haymitch's room to talk to him, because, she knows that he'll still be up. And there's only about a page and a half left of the chapter, so I'll just read it out loud for you guys. So it starts with Haymitch saying, "What do you want?" he says, nearly knocking me out with a cloud of wine fumes. "I have to talk to you," I whisper. "Now?" he says. I nod. "This better be good." He waits, but I feel certain every word we utter on a capital train is being recorded. "Well?" he barks. The train starts to break, and for a second I think President Snow is watching me and doesn't approve of my confiding in Haymitch and has decided to go ahead and kill me now. But we're just stopping for fuel. "The train's so stuffy," I say. It's a harmless phrase, but I see Haymitch's eyes narrow in understanding. "I know what you need." He pushes past me and lurches down the hall to a door. When he wrestles it open, a blast of snow hits us. He trips out onto the ground. A Capitol attendant rushes to help, but Haymitch waves her away good-naturedly as he staggers off. "Just want some fresh air. Only be a minute." "Sorry, he's drunk," I say apologetically. "I'll get him." I hop down and stumble along the track behind him, soaking my slippers with snow as he leads me beyond the end of the train so we will not be overheard. Then he turns to me. "What?" I tell him everything. About the president's visit, about Gale, about how we're all going to die if I fail. His face sobers up, grows older in the glow of the red tail lights. "Then you can't fail." "If you can just help me get through this trip," I begin. "No, Katniss, it's not just this trip," he says. "What do you mean?" I say. "Even if you pull it off, they'll be back in another few months to take us all to the games. You and Peeta, you'll be mentors now. Every year from here on out, and every year they'll revisit the romance and broadcast the details of your private life, and you'll never, ever be able to do anything but live happily ever after with that boy." The full impact of what he's saying hits me. I will never have a life with Gale, even if I want to. I will never be allowed to live alone. I will have to be forever in love with Peeta. The Capitol will insist on it. I'll have a few years, maybe, because I'm still only 16, to stay with my mother and Prim, and then... "Do you understand what I mean?" he presses me. I nod. He means there's only one future. If I want to keep those I love alive and stay alive myself, I'll have to marry Peeta. And just like that, we've come to the end of the chapter and the end of this episode. Next week, we'll unpack all that when we cover chapters 4 to 6. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I love doing this podcast, and I really appreciate all of you. Please, of course, subscribe so you get notified for future episodes, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I would really appreciate it if you left a review so that more wonderful people can find this podcast. Instagram, of course, is in the show notes. TikTok is also in the show notes, and the YouTube channel in the show notes as well. I have all the episodes finally uploaded onto YouTube. It took a lot of time, but I did it, and I'm proud of myself for doing it. And I even made a vlog last week just for fun. It's probably not the best quality, but whatever. I'm proud of it because I did it. So yeah, I think that's everything I need to cover. So like I said, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have a great day/night, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!